I used to think money and control were the two things that made a man valuable. I believed that if I was successful enough, disciplined enough, strong enough, no one would leave me. And if someone intended to leave, I just needed to do better, earn more, control tighter. I had lived like that for nearly 30 years of my life, until the day she stood in front of me and looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. Austin is a city of ambitious people. Coffee shops filled with startup founders, glass buildings reflecting the harsh Texas sunlight, networking meetings that lasted late into the night. I lived in a penthouse overlooking Lady Bird Lake. In the mornings, I ran along the lakeside, headphones playing podcasts about investing and self-optimization. I never allowed myself to slow down. I thought that was discipline. I thought that was strength. My name is Colby Mercer. I am a real estate investor. I am good at negotiating, good at reading contracts, good at seeing the potential of a piece of land before others notice it. I am also good at hiding my insecurity behind well-fitted suits and impressive profit numbers. I grew up in a family where my father was always absent. He worked constantly, and when he was home, he was silent. I learned that love meant providing materially, and silence was how men endured. Avery entered my life like a paradox. She was not impressed by the numbers I mentioned. She asked me how I felt when I closed a successful deal. That question made me uncomfortable. I answered with logic, with market analysis, with long-term strategy. She listened, but her eyes told me I had not answered what she truly asked. The conflict between us did not begin with big arguments. It began with silences. She said I was always in my head. She said I was rarely truly present when we were together. I argued that I was building a future for both of us. I said I worked hard because of us. In my mind, that was proof of love. When she began saying she felt lonely even when I was sitting next to her, I did not understand. I took her to Napa for a weekend getaway. I reserved a table at the most expensive restaurant. I bought her a delicate necklace. I thought that if I upgraded the experience, her emotions would automatically upgrade with it. But throughout dinner, I noticed she was quieter than usual. The climax of this chapter came on an ordinary evening. Not during a luxurious vacation, not in an expensive restaurant, but in my apartment, under the soft yellow lights. She looked at me and said, "Colby, I don't need a richer man. I need a more mature man." I gave a small laugh, trying to turn her words into emotional exaggeration. I said she was being too sensitive. I said every couple goes through phases like this. But as I said those words, I saw something change in her eyes. Not anger, not disappointment, but a distance beginning to form. And for the first time, I felt a fear I could not calculate or control. I tried to fix things by planning more. I sent her a schedule for a joint project I wanted us to invest in. I talked about buying a bigger house. I spoke about the future like a financial blueprint. She listened, but I knew she was waiting for something else. An admission, a presence, a vulnerability. When she left my apartment that night, she did not slam the door. She did not cry. She just said we needed to have a serious conversation over the weekend. And I stood there, in the vast space of the penthouse, convincing myself that everything was still under control. But deep inside, I knew one thing. I was not afraid of losing her because I loved her deeply. I was afraid of losing her because I did not know who I was if no one stayed to prove that I was enough. And that was the first moment I felt my control begin to crack. "You don't love me. You're just afraid of losing me." Those words did not come during a violent argument. They came on a rainy evening when Austin was soaked and the streetlights reflected against the glass of my apartment. I remember that moment very clearly because for the first time in my life, I did not know how to respond. We sat across from each other in the living room. The TV was off. My phone was face down on the table. I had tried to prove that I was present. But the presence Avery was talking about was not about turning off email notifications. She wanted something deeper, an openness I had never learned how to express. I looked at her and tried to keep my voice calm. "What are you talking about? I do all of this for us." She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. That made me more uncomfortable than any anger would have. "You do all of this because you're afraid of being abandoned," she said. "You don't love me. You're just afraid of losing me." I felt the blood rush to my head. In my world, love was measured by concrete actions, money, time, future plans. I had done all of those things. I had planned to buy a house. I had introduced her to business partners as if she were part of my success. I thought that was commitment. But she was talking about something I could not put into a contract. The real conflict began when she suggested we attend couple therapy. I laughed. I said we did not have serious problems. I said only couples on the verge of breaking up needed therapy. She looked at me for a long moment, as if considering whether I was ready to hear. "We are already on the edge," she said softly. That sentence made me angry. I stood up, walked to the window, looked down at the rain-soaked streets. I said she was exaggerating. I said every relationship has difficult phases. I said I was under work pressure. I gave every possible reason except admitting that I might be the problem. She began setting boundaries, not by yelling or threatening, but by pulling back. She did not reply to my messages immediately. She did not cancel her personal plans just because I wanted to change the schedule. She no longer smiled lightly when I made disguised, controlling comments like, "I just want to protect you." I began to feel my control slipping, and instead of asking myself why I needed control, I tried to tighten it. I asked where she was. I asked who she was with. I said I was just concerned. But deep inside, it was fear. Another evening, we sat across from each other again. No rain this time, only thick silence. She said, "You never learned how to love without controlling." I reacted immediately. I said I was not controlling. I said I was just clear. I said I was responsible. But as those words left my mouth, I realized they sounded more like excuses than truth. She asked me a question no one had ever asked. "If I left tomorrow, how would you feel?" I answered quickly. "I would be hurt." She nodded. "And if I stayed but no longer loved you, how would you feel?" That question stopped me. I had never thought about love as something that could leave while the person remained. In my mind, as long as she had not walked away, everything was fine. I had never asked whether she still felt safe, seen, loved. The climax of the conversation came when she repeated the first sentence, this time more slowly. "You don't love me. You're just afraid of losing me. Because if I leave, you'll have to face the feeling of not being enough." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to argue. But this time, I couldn't. A part of me knew she was touching a truth I had avoided for years. I walked out of the apartment. I drove aimlessly through the rain-lit streets. I told myself she was demanding too much. I told myself women always want men to talk about feelings. I tried to convince myself I was not wrong. But when I stopped the car by the lake and turned off the engine, silence fell. No engine noise, no music, just me and her words echoing in my head. If I don't love her, then what is love? If I am just afraid of losing her, then why am I holding on to her? And if she is right, then for all these years, I have been living from fear, not love. I returned to the apartment late that night. She had gone home. The room felt emptier than usual. I looked at the chair where she often sat, and for the first time, I did not feel anger. I felt confusion. I realized that every strategy I used to win in business was useless in love. I could not negotiate with emotions. I could not invest more money in exchange for connection. I could not control a heart with logic. And although I was not ready to admit it out loud, I knew something was shifting. She was no longer fighting me. She was slowly leaving me. She did not cry when she left. And that was what scared me the most. That morning in Austin was strangely clear. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling glass of the penthouse, reflecting on the light wooden floor. Everything was the same as every other day. Traffic sounds below, the automatic coffee machine humming, meeting schedules appearing on my phone screen. But there was something different in the air. An excessive stillness, as if a storm had passed and left only emptiness behind. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. No more rain, no more arguments. just a calmness that made me uneasy. Avery looked at me longer than usual, but her eyes were no longer searching for reassurance from me. They looked like the eyes of someone who had already made a decision. I tried to begin with familiar sentences. I said I had reconsidered. I said maybe we just needed time. I said I could be more flexible. Those words sounded more like a business proposal than the words of a man afraid of losing the woman he loved. She placed her hands on the table, interlaced her fingers, and spoke slowly. "Colby, you're not ready for a soul-level love." That sentence was not an attack. It was not an accusation, but it pierced the deepest part of me. I wanted to ask her what soul-level love meant. I wanted to turn it into a vague concept that would be easier to argue against. But I knew she was not talking about something mystical. She was talking about presence, about the ability to stay without defending, about loving without controlling. I tried to convince her. I said I would change. I said I would try therapy. I said I would listen more. But even as I spoke, I realized there was something untrue in my voice. I was speaking because I was afraid of losing her, not because I truly understood where I had gone wrong. She did not argue. She did not ask for proof. She simply shook her head slightly. "I'm not leaving because you're bad," she said. "I'm leaving because I can't keep shrinking myself so you can feel safe." That sentence silenced me. I had never thought that my control could make her shrink herself. In my mind, I was just protecting her. But now, I began to see another possibility. Maybe I had turned love into a structure where only I felt safe. I stepped closer to her. I said we could start over. I said no relationship is perfect. I mentioned the trips, the evenings we laughed together, the plans for the future. I tried to pull her back with memories. She looked at me, and for the first time I clearly saw sadness in her eyes. Not sadness because I was not good enough, but sadness because I was not ready to grow. The climax came when she took the keychain out of her coat pocket and placed it on the table. The metallic sound against the stone surface echoed dryly. "I love you," she said, "but I love myself more." I did not react in time. I did not think of a clever response. I just stood there, looking at the key lying between us like a visible boundary. My heart was pounding, but my mind was blank. I asked her if there was someone else. I needed a concrete reason to hold on to. Another man would have been easier to accept than the fact that I was the cause. She shook her head. "There is no one else," she said. "Just me, and my limits." The door opened. Morning light flooded the hallway. She pulled her small suitcase behind her, but her steps were not rushed. No tears, no drama, just a decision that had already been made. When the door closed, the apartment became so quiet that I could hear the air conditioner running. I stood there for a few minutes without moving. I waited for a message. I waited for a call. I waited for her to come back and say she just needed space. But my phone remained silent. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. People were still living their lives. Cars were still moving. The real estate market was still open. The world did not stop just because a relationship ended. But inside me, something had just collapsed. I began to ask myself whether I had truly loved her, or whether I had only loved the feeling of having someone beside me confirming that I was enough. I remembered the times I decided for her, the times I said, "I know what's best for you," the times I cut off her emotions with logical solutions. I had never truly asked what she needed. I only assumed. I picked up the keychain. It felt heavier than I expected. Not because of the metal weight, but because of its meaning. For the first time in my life, I could not fix a situation with strategy. No negotiation, no additional terms, no backup plan. Only the truth that she had chosen to leave. And I had to face it. That night, I did not call friends. I did not open my laptop to work. I sat on the living room floor, leaning against the sofa, staring at the ceiling. I thought about her words. "You're not ready for a soul-level love." Maybe she was right. Maybe I had never learned how to love without defending. Maybe I had never learned how to stay when emotions became uncomfortable. And for the first time, instead of anger or blame, I felt something else. emptiness. Not the emptiness of the apartment, but the emptiness inside me. I did not lose her the day she left. I lost her the day I realized I was the problem. 3 months after that morning, Austin was still as sunny as usual. The city did not care about breakups. Coffee shops were still full, pitching sessions were still happening, the real estate market was still moving. And I still woke up at 5 a.m., still ran around Lady Bird Lake, still put on a tailored suit and walked into meetings. From the outside, no one could tell that anything had changed. But inside me, it was different. I began to lose sleep. Not the kind of insomnia caused by work stress. The kind caused by a mind that would not go quiet. I lay on the wide bed of the penthouse, staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner, thinking about every sentence she had said. You're not ready for a soul-level love. I can't keep shrinking myself. You're just afraid of losing me. During the day, I was still the old Colby Mercer. I signed contracts, I negotiated, I smiled confidently. But the empty moments between meetings began to feel longer. I stared at my laptop screen and realized I was not focused. I closed a major deal, and instead of the usual rush of excitement, I felt emptiness. I avoided friends. When they asked about Avery, I said we were taking a break. I turned the truth into something easier to hear. I did not want to admit she had left. Not because of someone else, not because of a dramatic event, but because I did not know how to love without controlling. The real conflict began when I started thinking about my father more often. He was always absent, physically and emotionally. When I was a child, I used to wait for him to come home so I could tell him about a soccer game, a good grade. He would nod, pat my shoulder, then return to his office. I grew up believing that if I was good enough, successful enough, I would not be abandoned. And I carried that belief into every relationship. I realized I had loved Avery the way my father lived, providing but not present, controlling but not listening, silent when emotions became complicated. One afternoon after a meeting I barely remembered speaking in, I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened my phone. I searched attachment styles. I did not know why I did that. Maybe because I needed an explanation, a logical structure for my collapse. I read about avoidant attachment, about men who fear deep intimacy but also fear abandonment. I read each line and felt like I was reading myself. I was not cold because I did not care. I was cold because I was afraid. The climax came during my first therapy session. I did not tell anyone I had scheduled it. I walked into the office with the mindset of someone trying a new solution. I thought I would analyze the problem like I analyzed an investment project. But when the therapist asked me, "How did you feel when she left?" I could not answer immediately. I began talking about circumstances, timing, work pressure. I spoke with familiar logic. She did not interrupt. She simply repeated the question, "How did you feel?" And for the first time, I did not have a smart answer. I felt my throat tighten. I said quietly, "I felt like I wasn't enough." And as soon as those words left my mouth, I started crying. Not dramatic sobbing, just tears falling before I could stop them. I cried for Avery, but I also cried for the 10-year-old boy who once waited for his father's attention. I cried because for years, I had built a successful version of myself to hide the fear that if someone saw the real me, they would leave. After that therapy session, I could no longer pretend it was just incompatibility. I began reading more. I listened to podcasts about emotional regulation. I journaled. I wrote a letter to my 12-year-old self, telling that boy he did not need to be perfect to be loved. But the process was not beautiful or fast. There were days I wanted to text Avery, to tell her I was changing. There were days I wanted to prove to her that I was worthy. But the therapist told me something I hated hearing. You don't change to get her back. You change to become yourself. That made me angry at first. I was used to every effort having a clear goal. But here the goal was not another person. It was honesty with myself. One evening, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, looking straight into my own eyes. I asked, if she never comes back, Do I still want to become this man? That question scared me, because the answer would decide everything. The solution did not come as a grand revelation. It came as a small decision. I could not continue living as if emotions were secondary. I could not continue measuring my worth by profit. The therapist suggested I leave Austin for a while. Not to run away, but to separate myself from the environment where I always played the winner. At first, I resisted. My work was here. My reputation was here. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed space. Space without our memories. Space where I could not easily fall back into old habits. I booked a ticket to Sedona. I did not tell many people. I simply informed my partners that I would work remotely for a while. When the flight confirmation email arrived, I stared at the screen a few seconds longer than usual. I did not know what I would find there. But I knew one thing. If I stayed here, I would continue becoming the old version of myself. And for the first time in my life, I was not chasing a deal. I was chasing the truth about myself. The desert does not care how successful you once were. It only cares what you are running from. When the plane landed in Arizona and I drove toward Sedona, the landscape gradually changed. Glass buildings and crowded highways disappeared, replaced by massive red rock formations rising under a cloudless blue sky. No real estate billboards. No packed meeting schedules. Only long, dry roads and a stillness that would not let me pretend to be busy. I rented a small house overlooking Cathedral Rock. No penthouse, no marble floors, no city noise. On the first morning there, I woke up without an alarm. Desert sunlight slipped through the curtains, and for the first time in months, I did not immediately reach for my phone. No emails, no messages, just space. I was no longer Colby Mercer of the boardrooms. In Sedona, no one knew who I was. I was just a man enrolled in a 3-week retreat program. I wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, sitting among strangers in a room that smelled of wood and incense. I had no business cards to hand out, no achievements to display, and that made me uncomfortable. The conflict did not come from outside. It came from silence. When I could no longer use work as distraction, thoughts began to surface. I realized I did not know how to be alone without finding something to fill the emptiness. I walked along the Red Rock trails, but my mind still tried to plan, calculate, predict. One morning, the facilitator asked us to turn off our phones completely for 48 hours. I felt an irrational panic, not because I needed work, but because I was afraid to face myself. I had grown used to filling every gap with noise. We meditated at sunrise. At first, it felt meaningless. I was not used to closing my eyes without doing anything. I thought about Avery. I thought about what I could say if I saw her again. I thought about proving I had changed. But the facilitator said something that made me stop. You are not here to fix the past. You are here to understand the present. I began journaling every night, not to analyze strategy, but to record feelings. At first, I wrote briefly and dryly, but gradually the lines became more honest. I admitted I had controlled because I was afraid. I admitted I had loved in a way that made me feel safe, not in a way that made her feel seen. During a group therapy session, I was asked to share about the relationship that ended. I spoke about success, pressure, differences in perspective. But someone in the group asked me, "Have you ever apologized without explaining?" That question silenced me. I always apologized with reasons. I always needed to be right at some level. The climax of this chapter came during a guided meditation at sunset. We sat on a rock ledge, desert wind blowing gently. The facilitator asked us to imagine the person who left standing in front of us. I saw Avery. Not angry, not sad, just calm. In that imagination, I did not try to pull her back. I did not promise change. I simply said, "Thank you for leaving." When those words echoed in my mind, I suddenly realized I was not saying them to appear noble. I was saying them because I understood that if she had not left, I would never have seen myself. I opened my eyes and realized I was crying. But this time, not from loss, but from clarity. After 3 weeks, I did not become a completely new person. I still had old reflexes. I still wanted to control when I felt insecure. But I began to notice those reflexes before they controlled me. I called my mother. I asked her about my father. I listened as she spoke about his fears, about pressures he never talked about. For the first time, I saw him as an imperfect human being, not a failed model. I began practicing simple sentences. I am afraid. I am not sure. I need time. Sentences I once considered weak. When I left Sedona, I did not carry a new conquest plan. I carried a decision. I no longer wanted to be the man who always wins. I wanted to be the man who is honest. 2 years passed after that. I returned to Austin, but my rhythm was different. I still worked, but I no longer used it to escape. I was still ambitious, but I no longer used ambition to hide fear. And one evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I realized I had not thought about Avery for weeks. Not because I tried to forget, but because I no longer needed her to confirm my worth. The solution was not her coming back. The solution was that I had learned to stay with myself. And for the first time, I understood that freedom is not when you can leave. Freedom is when you no longer need someone to stay for you to feel enough. Freedom is not when you can leave. Freedom is when you no longer need someone to stay. 2 years after leaving Sedona, I returned to Austin with a different feeling. The city was the same. Glass buildings reflecting Texas sunlight, noisy networking events, real estate deals moving every day. But I no longer stepped into that rhythm as someone running away. I stepped into it as someone who had learned how to pause. I was still Colby Mercer, a real estate investor. I still wore suits to important meetings. I still read financial reports and assessed risks. But my mornings began with 15 minutes of meditation, not email. I no longer reached for my phone the moment I opened my eyes. I sat on the balcony overlooking the lake, breathing and feeling my body before feeling the world. I continued therapy, not because I was in crisis, but because I understood that growth is not a project with a completion date. I learned to recognize my triggers. When someone did not reply to a message immediately, I felt a familiar pulse of anxiety. But instead of controlling, I asked myself, what am I afraid of? That question changed my reaction. A new conflict appeared when I began dating again. For the first time in years, I entered a relationship without defining it immediately. I met a woman who was intelligent and independent. We had enjoyable evenings and deep conversations. But I did not try to turn her into a future plan. I did not introduce her as part of my success. I simply let things unfold. There were moments I realized I was different. When she said she needed the weekend alone, I did not feel threatened. When she disagreed with me in a discussion, I did not need to win. I listened, not to find a counter-argument, but to understand. But that did not mean I was no longer afraid. One evening, when she said she was not sure we were compatible long-term, I felt my chest tighten. Old reflexes resurfaced. Prove, persuade, promise. I wanted to say I could change, that I could do better. But I stopped. I realized I could not force someone to stay without repeating the past. The climax of this chapter did not come in a breakup or reunion. It came in a quiet moment. One evening, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights shining through the glass. I realized I had not thought about Avery for weeks. Not because I tried to forget, not because I replaced her, but because I no longer used her image to measure my worth. I remembered the question I once asked myself in the mirror. If she never comes back, do I still want to become this man? And at that moment, I knew the answer was yes. The solution was not having someone new. The solution was not becoming more successful. The solution was that I had learned to stay with my emotions without turning them into controlling actions. One day, I received an invitation to attend a workshop on emotional leadership in San Diego. In the past, I might have declined because I was busy. But this time I felt curious. Not to learn how to lead others, but to continue learning how to lead myself. Before leaving Austin, I stood at the apartment window, looking down at the city where I once tried to prove I was enough. I no longer saw it as a battlefield. I saw it as part of the journey. I did not know what was waiting for me in San Diego. I did not know whether the past would reappear. But for the first time, I was not going with the goal of conquering. I was going with readiness. And I understood more clearly than ever. I no longer needed someone to stay for me to feel enough. If love appeared, I would choose it. But I would not grip it out of fear. I did not prepare to see her again. Maybe because I was no longer living in a state of waiting. San Diego welcomed me with the smell of salt and softer sunlight than Texas. Unlike Austin, where everything always moved fast and loud, this city carried a slower rhythm. I attended the emotional leadership workshop with the mindset of learning, not proving anything. I sat in the middle row, taking notes, listening, not trying to impress. On the morning of the second day, when I walked into the conference room, I saw her. Avery stood near the window, ocean light reflecting on her hair. She was speaking with a small group, her hands moving gently as she explained something. I stopped. Not because of shock, not because of pain, but because of a stillness spreading in my chest. 2 years ago, if I had seen her again, I would have prepared a speech. I would have talked about what I had learned, the changes I had gone through, new achievements. But now, I did not feel the need to prove. She saw me. Our eyes met. No drama, no background music playing in my head. Just two people who once loved each other, standing across from each other after enough time had passed for both to change. She smiled first, a light, unforced smile. I walked closer. "Hi," I said. My voice was calmer than I expected. "Hi," she replied. We did not hug. We did not touch. But the air between us was no longer tense like before. I did not feel the need to pull her closer, nor the urge to withdraw to protect myself. The real conflict was not in seeing each other again. It was in the silent question between us. Have we changed enough? After the workshop, we walked along the beach. Waves rolled gently, sea breeze carrying salt in the air. I did not begin with an apology immediately. I asked how she had been. She talked about her work, the projects she was involved in, the support groups she facilitated. I listened, without interrupting, without trying to insert my own story. Finally, I said, "I'm sorry." No long explanation, no attached reasons, just one sentence. She looked at me. For what? For all the times I tried to control instead of listen. The times I thought being right mattered more than you feeling safe. I did not say it to be forgiven. I said it because it was true. She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You've changed." I did not answer immediately. I did not want to turn that sentence into proof of my worth. "I am changing," I said, "and I probably will have to keep changing." The climax of the reunion came when she asked, "What if I leave again?" 2 years ago, that question would have made me panic. I would have tried to ensure it would not happen. I would have promised, persuaded, found ways to keep her. But this time, I took a deep breath before answering. "I would hurt," I said, "but I wouldn't lose myself anymore." I looked straight into her eyes when I said that. Not to challenge, but to show her I no longer placed my entire worth in whether she stayed or not. She did not speak immediately, but I saw something soften in her eyes. Not because I was perfect, but because I was no longer afraid in the same way. We sat on the sand with enough space between us. We talked about the past 2 years. She said she had also learned not to save others by sacrificing herself. She learned to set boundaries earlier. I listened and realized we had both walked our own journeys. The resolution did not come in the form of a promise to get back together immediately. We did not decide to start over in that moment. We simply agreed to keep talking. No rush, no pressure. As the sun set over the ocean, orange light covering the water, I felt something I had never felt when I was with her before. Peace. I did not need her to prove that I had changed. I did not need her to choose me to confirm that I was enough. I just sat there, next to the woman I once loved, and felt my own presence. When we stood up to leave the beach, she lightly touched my hand. A small gesture, but not possessive. Not the return of the past, but a possibility. And for the first time, I understood that love is not about holding tight. Love is allowing both people to be free and still choosing to stay. True love is not about finding your other half. It is two whole people choosing each other. In the days after that afternoon on the beach, we did not rush into each other like two people given a second chance. We texted, met for coffee, attended a few more workshops together. Everything moved slowly, consciously. No grand promises, no rushed plans. I noticed the difference in the way I showed up to those meetings. I did not prepare perfect things to say in advance. I did not calculate her reactions. I came as myself, some days calm, some days still awkward, but honest. One evening we sat across from each other at a small cafe near the ocean. Warm yellow light reflected on the glass of water between us. She asked me, "Are you afraid?" I knew she was not asking about work. She was asking about loving again. "Of course," I said, "but I'm not afraid in the old way." She tilted her head, waiting for me to continue. "Before, I was afraid of losing you because I thought if you left, I wouldn't be enough. Now I'm afraid because love always carries risk. But I know that whatever happens, I'm still myself." It was not a powerful statement, but it was true. The final conflict was not between me and her. It was between the old version and the new version of me. There were moments I still wanted to control. When she stayed silent longer than usual, I still felt a flash of anxiety. When she said she needed time to think, I still had the reflex to push for an answer. But this time, I did not act on that reflex. I said, "I'm feeling anxious." I said, "I need a few minutes to understand my emotions." Simple sentences, but ones I had never spoken before. The climax of the story did not happen in a proposal or a grand declaration. It came during another afternoon on the beach. We walked side by side, not holding hands, just listening to the waves. I stopped before she said anything. I looked at her and said, "I don't need you anymore." I saw her eyes pause for a moment. I continued before a misunderstanding could form. "I don't need you to feel enough. I don't need you to fill an emptiness. I don't need you to prove that I have value." I took a deep breath. "But I choose you. Not because I'm afraid of loneliness. Not because I'm afraid of being abandoned. Not because I can't live without you. But because when I stand beside you, I am still myself." She looked at me for a long time. No tears, no drama. Just a softness spreading between us. "I don't need you either," she said softly. "But I choose you." In that moment, I understood what she once meant by soul-level love. Not destiny or dependency, but freedom alongside commitment. The resolution was not an ending that closed all risks. We did not promise never to hurt. We did not swear never to fear. We only committed to one thing. If fear appears, we will speak it, instead of turning it into control. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I remembered the morning she placed the key on the table and said she loved herself more. At that time, I saw it as loss. Now I understand it was a lesson. If she had not left, I would have continued loving from fear. I would have continued living inside the shell of success. I would have continued seeking validation from outside. I lost her to find myself. And when I found myself, I no longer loved from fear. I loved from freedom. We did not need to hold hands to know we were together. The small distance between our hands on the sand was no longer a gap of anxiety. It was the space of choice. I looked out at the ocean, listening to the steady waves, and for the first time in my life, I was not trying to control anything. I was simply there. With her. With myself. And that was enough.